All right, and without further ado, I'd like to welcome our opening plenary speaker, Jarrad Merlo. Jarrad is the co-founder and director of teaching and learning at E2 Language, the world's most popular website for English exam prep and online English. All right, Jarrad, take it away.
All right. Yeah. Thanks very much, English Australia. Thank you to Sophie and Hanno and Paul and everyone at UQ IST for organising this. This is, I think it's a good thing. It's a much needed thing to talk about education technology in the language learning space, especially in light of recent events. I'm just going to share my screen and I'll get started. Okay. So what I'm going to talk about today is digital transformation, and I'm going to try and make sense of that in the context of language learning and schools. I'm going to try to define it. I'm also going to talk more broadly about its application, about really the nuts and bolts of how we digitally transform a school so that it works successfully online. I think the best place to start there is to probably talk about my background and the company's background where I'm from. So I come from an applied linguistics background. I'm actually an English language teacher. But now at E2 Language, I work in a software development company. And what we do is we specialize in EdTech, but we specialize more specifically in language learning technologies. We have several different products, including a test prep website, which is B2C, straight off the internet. We've got another B2C website called E2 School, which is for general English language learning. It's interesting because it covers all the different skills of English, including grammar and pronunciation, which is incredibly hard to program, from basically beginners up to advanced level. We've got another product called E2 Classroom, which is infrastructure software for language schools, and a broader learning application called Learning Base. So we've been around for about 4 years. On E2 Language alone, we've racked up 1 million users. We've got a very large social media following of 1.1 million YouTube subscribers. We're NIAS's first and only actually, quality assured digital language school. We have partnerships with the likes of Pearson and CBLA, who own the OET test. When we get down to the thick of it, we've marked about 30 to 40,000 assessments through our platform. Speaking and writing assessments. We've delivered about 8,000 group classes on Zoom and about 15,000 one-on-one tutorials. Our company is kind of lopsided. We're not full of teachers. We're sort of actually full of devs. We've got about 30 developers working for us. We've got 23 full and part-time teachers, 6 instructional designers, and 3 media people who do a lot of video editing and audio editing and stuff like that. So we're sort of very much a language school of the future. We're quite different. Okay, let's try and define, from that context, let's try and define digital transformation, talk about meaning. I think critically, what we're trying to do here with digital transformation is to digitize everything that teachers, students, and administrators do in a school. And those 3 actors are critical there. There's 3 key people there, the teachers, the students, and the admins. We digitize everything. By everything, what I mean is we digitize all of the content, all of the workflows, and all of the interactions that take place. So we take a paper-based test and we make it digital. We make a face-to-face interaction, we make it digital, let alone all of the administrative tasks of whatnot, of timetabling, etc. And with digital transformation, there's more that we can do. We can go beyond just transforming what we currently do. What we can do is continually develop purpose-built tech to improve upon current practices. I think there's enormous potential in technology to radically change the way that students learn English, prepare for tests, etc., and also how teachers will actually teach as well, make their lives a lot easier. Just while I'm in this sort of meaning mode, let's talk about different delivery modes of technology. So there's self-access types of apps, like Duolingo is a good example of a self-access app. It's just bits. There's no people involved. It's just you sort of and gamification and whatnot. Then you've got websites like E2 Language, which is fully online. So we don't have a premises, we're just a website, we're bits, but we have teachers, and we have teachers delivering tutorials and marking assessments, etc. Then you have hybrid institutes like, I'm not sure if you've heard of Wall Street Institute, but that was a very good, or is a very good example of a chain of English schools that leveraged the online very well, where people would self-study and then rock up to the premises for small group classes, etc. So a very nice blend. And that's the critical one. That's where I think English language schools ought to get to. Of course, there's blended, which is just when you're using computer technology in the classroom, but primarily you're still a bricks and mortar school, okay? Then, of course, there's just bricks and mortar. And I've got that little heart symbol there because I really think their days are numbered unless they make some sort of shift to digital in a proper way. Okay, so that's meaning. So the digitization of everything that teachers, students, and admin do at a school. Let's talk about application. And I'm going to talk about nuts and bolts of developing websites, developing features, developing workflows, etc., to make this actually possible. The first thing, of course, is location. And English language schools, of course, they have a location, they have a premises, they have a street address. And now they're going to need a web address that'll be just as effective, or just as important rather, as their school. There's different things you can do here. You can code your own website from scratch. And I've purposely put $7 signs there because if you're going to do this, it's going to be enormously expensive. We're talking millions of dollars. Or what you're going to be able to do in the not too distant future, or even now, is pay software as a service fee. Like you sort of rent your Microsoft Office or you pay for your Netflix, etc. You're going to be renting infrastructure software from technology companies that will do this for you. And that's obviously a far better idea. One of the interesting things that happened when COVID came and everyone had to shift to emergency, emergency remote teaching, that there was a complete loss of brand distinction with schools. All of a sudden, schools that had great location, great building and infrastructure and reputation amongst students and agents, etc., all of a sudden we're using free, disparate tools on the internet. And there was really nothing to distinguish them from somebody on Gumtree, for example. There was a complete loss of brand distinction. Whereas when you have a website, your brand distinction is your URL, your web address, like e2language.com, your search engine optimization, where you rank in Google and YouTube, or perhaps Youku, for example, and your user interfaces, how pretty your website is. That becomes your brand distinction in many ways. One of the critical things that you need to think about when you do have a platform and a system for language learning or just learning in general is who's the driver, who's the primary driver of this system. Apps like Duolingo or Babbel or MOOCs, they're very much student-centric, especially in MOOCs when the teacher ends up, when they don't have that live teaching component. They're student-centric platforms. And these are notoriously hard to get off the ground. They have low retention rates at the best of times. They're tough to get right because very few students can drive themselves through a system. The other one is an admin-centric model. LMSs like Moodle, Canvas, Blackboard, these are very much designed for large institutes of sort of 10,000 plus students. And they're built, really, the student management, document management systems, the authoring tools and the teaching capabilities that are built into them are not central to their purpose. Then you've got teacher-centric platforms. And this is what we're really focusing on at E2 Language. We believe that it's the teacher who drives the dynamic. That's what happens in the classroom or the school anyway. So very much you want to build, you obviously have to have an admin login and a student login, but the teacher login is the one that's going to bring them to class every day and drive the learning process. That learning process is driven via live teaching, which you guys have just experienced in a matter of jumping into it with 10 days notice. We did it over a period of 6 years. So voice over IP. There's different ways that you can live teach, of course. There's one-to-many. We do this. We often teach live classes that will have upwards of 200, 300, hundreds of students in them. And they're interesting. It's very much a process of frog marching students with not much interaction, certainly not much feedback for them in that case. But it's very much a scalable option. It's inexpensive. You'll be paying one teacher to teach hundreds of students if you can get there. Then you've got small groups. We've been mucking around with small groups recently. We've just started experimenting with that. These are nice, cozy. We do 5 students per group, 3 to 5 students. And that's a place where you can actually start to deliver feedback and deliver, much more personal interactions with the students. And then, of course, you've got one-on-one tutorials. These are expensive, but they're they're good. You know, if the student wants to improve on his IELTS writing score, this is the place to really do it. The other type of interaction that you'll have is peer-to-peer. All of these interactions rely heavily on content. The technology is sort of an aside. Once you've sort of got the hang of teaching on Zoom, it's very much a content game. Content is gold for all of this, as you've probably become aware. When we're talking about content for voice over IP or online teaching, the content has to be horizontal. That is, you don't want to have documents where you're scrolling up and down. This is just the basic format needs to be, we believe anyway, certainly in a PowerPoint style where you'll be going across ways. Otherwise, it's kind of nauseating for the student and the teacher. The content has to be interactive. You have to build in interactions into the content. Maybe it's pop quizzes or I don't know, there's different ways to do it. The other interesting thing you can do with content is make it timed. One of the key differentiators of online teaching compared to class teaching is you lose all of the paralinguistic cues in the classroom. You know, usually when you're up the front of the class teaching, you'll give an activity. You don't time it. You just wait for the smartest kid in the room to pop their hand up, and then you'll give the rest a bit of time, and you sort of know when things are coming to an end and know when to move on. That's lost in an online environment. So what's really nice is to add timers to tasks. So it sets expectations for everybody, including yourself, and it just works nicely. But most important really is you need lots of content, especially if you're going to be teaching 8-week courses, etc. So content again is gold here. One of the issues in technology platforms or digital transformation is coordination. If you look at that little icon image there, that sort of represents what Uber did. Uber solved the problem of coordination. They solved the problem of a person standing on the side of the street who wants to go to X location, and somebody's driving around their car for some spare time. And so they connect those people together and give them a goal. Platforms, if you're going to be doing large group classes, small group classes, one-on-ones, peer-to-peer, it's a problem of coordination. And sometimes it can be a problem of time zones as well, especially for us anyway. We have students located all around the world. We have teachers located all around the world. So you have to solve that problem. That's done through a central location where everybody logs into their platform, and it's driven out of a calendar full of events, okay? Another aspect that you need to solve for is availability. Teachers need to be able to set availability. I want to work, for example, Thursday, 4 to 6 p.m. Students can then book in the available slots that I have provided. That's an issue that you need to solve for. You also need to solve for students and teachers who need to cancel or reschedule, obviously with enough notice, and that teachers who want to swap shifts, just like you do in your language school. You know, you call up your colleague and say, hey, I've got to go to the dentist on Friday. Can you do my class on whatever? That needs to be done also in a digital environment. The other thing you can do with teachers here is students can rate teachers, but you can also set preferences with teachers so that usually the allocation of tutorials or classes would be done in a round robin style. You know, one for you, one for you, one for you, one for you. But what you can do is actually change it through. So this teacher gets 2, this guy gets 1, this guy gets 1. So there's different things you can do there with preferential ratings, which is pretty cool. Back to content. I dislike textbooks. I really do. Even when I was a language teacher in the classroom, I always just avoided the textbook because I just found it to be too lockstep. It just didn't work. You know, one of the things that I've sort of been looking at recently is textbooks that teach the be verb, and there'll be some sort of table up in the corner with the be verb, and it takes up a little bit of space here. The be verb is so incredibly complex. When we built our level 0 course for beginners, our be verb explanation took pages and pages. This is digital pages. You're not stuck with the real estate of paper when you're in digital. So you can actually flesh things out and explain things. The other great thing about digital material is that it's multimodal. So you can focus on listening, speaking, you know, it has interaction built into it. A textbook is pretty much, as far as I'm concerned, good for reading. That's about it. And I'd like to see the end of textbooks, to be honest. Teacher materials is interesting. We need to make a distinction here between teaching materials and student materials. Teaching materials need to be ready-made. They need to be editable because teachers like to put their own spin on things, and they need to be pedagogically rich. because again, teachers are the driver of the platform, and teachers are the one who do the explaining of the complex concepts. Student material, on the other hand, shouldn't have complex concepts built into it. It should be, here's a nice word I like, non-didactic. Students, very few students can teach themselves a language. It really ought to be things where they can just play and get feedback on whether they're doing it right or wrong, and some feedback like that. So think about student materials as really sort of disposable with instant gratification. In order to build materials, you need an authoring tool, and hopefully a purpose-built one. That's what we've developed. This is an example of our authoring tool that we use. It's elegant, it's nice, it's a drag and drop. This thing looks ugly because it's just, I haven't done any of the aesthetic design here. But what I'm able to do is drag across media, and I'm able to drag across scoreable widgets. So what I can do is I can combine media with widgets here. That is, I can combine let's say an audio file with a fill in the blanks. I can combine a picture with the highlight words, whatever your imagination enables you to do. And these widgets that we have here, we have the classic ones like multiple choice and reorder paragraphs. But this is where we differ from a traditional LMS, is we can start to get really specific into language learning widgets, like scoreable audio, pronunciation evaluation, etc. And below that, you have submittable widgets. That is, you design activities that are not for instant gratification. They'll be submitted through to the teacher, and I'll talk to you about that in a little bit. This is also where you'll be mucking around with metrics and putting in points and weightages and determining whether this point goes to listening or reading or whatever. This is an example of an activity that is built from our authoring tool. It's for pronunciation evaluation. The speaker listens to a sentence, repeats the sentence, and it's actually going to provide phoneme level feedback on the particular words. When we're talking about content, what's critical, and again, this is digital transformation. This happens in schools. People share content, right? I develop a course, I give it to this person, or the director of studies does it, whatever. It should be working here as well. So let me explain this diagram to you. Let's start with the publisher. Imagine the publisher is like the big hitters like Pearson or Cambridge, or it could be a university, or it could be a small school, it could be an individual, it doesn't matter. But imagine all these platforms are connected together, like all these language schools are connected together on a network system. So somebody develops a great course. Let's say it's a business English course. That's stored down there in the hub, okay? And ABC School can connect to that hub and download the course, not a textbook, you're not sending these through the post, download the course onto the platform. The course itself can come with permissions for editing rights, etc. All of these sorts of editing rights are stored in the blockchain, so publishers can be sure about their IP, etc. Let's say ABC School has a sister school called XYZ School. ABC School can, after editing and changing, if that's allowed, can send that across to XYZ School, right? Now, what can also happen there for regulatory requirements is ASCWA or TEXA can actually log into the blockchain as students are doing, completing their coursework throughout the semester, and they can check grades, they can check attendance, etc. This is an unalterable blockchain, so of course it's going to be true, whatever that information is. This is just a very sort of basic diagram, but again, digital transformation, whatever happens in a language school, including sharing of content, should be able to happen in a platform environment. It's worth touching on assessments. I'm just going to see my time here. Okay, cool. It's worth touching on assessments. I believe that computer technology is superior to paper-based technology when it comes to assessments, because you can build things like adaptive tests, right? So what you'll do is you'll have your items, and you will grade your items in terms of difficulty, easy, medium, hard. For argument's sake, student comes along, takes an easy one, gets it right, gets a medium one, gets it wrong, goes back down to easy, and they can make their way through some sort of placement test, for example, with that adaptivity. You can also do diagnostic testing if you label your items. That is, you might do a reading test where there'll be inference questions, or reading for detail, or reading for gist, or whatever it is, and the student will be getting particular ones wrong. The computer will then be able to diagnose the students struggling with, say, inference, reading for inference. Technology is good for medium stakes testing. And that would have to be done with remote proctoring. This is something that we're just sort of getting interested in now, but there's different ways to do that. Feedback is critical. You know, in the classroom, you would get your essays, you would mark them up in red pens and you'd give them back to the student. And the efficacy of that is, I think it's questionable. I certainly never paid attention to the feedback teachers gave me. There's different ways to do it in a computer environment. There's instant feedback. So obviously you're doing a listening, a reading, or a grammar exercise, you're going to get it right or wrong, okay? Then you've got the subjective types of skills like the writing and the speaking. There's some interesting AI coming out now. I just showed you the speaking one, for example, that gives you phoneme level feedback. But we're getting close to, there are individual companies now building these little bits of AI that we can stick into the platform, which is cool. In terms of feedback, you've also got hints and explainers. That is, you might get a question wrong and you're allowed to retry. That's a type of hint. Or you might get a question wrong and it'll tell you why you got it wrong. That's a type of hint. Or you might get a question wrong and it might sort of indicate, give you a little hint as to where in the text you might hope to, you should read. The other thing you can do with computer technology is build explainer videos. So somebody's tried to do a reading question, they're struggling, they'll hit the explainer video, up pops the asynchronous recorded video of the teacher actually going through and explaining why the answer is B and not C. Next thing that we've been mucking around with for quite a long time is rubrics. I mentioned at the start that we've marked about 30 or 40,000, we're not quite sure, assessments, speaking and writing assessments. And obviously when you get into that sort of volume, you want to build something that is efficient for the teacher to mark and meaningful for the student, okay? Efficiency and meaningfulness, that's the two things you're aiming for. And so what you want to build are sort of automated rubrics. Here's an example of one. So what we're doing here is, this is where you build an automated rubric. So this is IELTS writing. So you put in your criteria, task achievement, coherence, cohesion, whatever. You put in your scoring, 8765. And then what you do is you actually, you can type in automated comments, right? So then what happens when you're actually going through and marking the particular essay and going high, very high, medium, whatever, it's populating comments for the student. And if you forget what the question prompt was about, you can hover your mouse over the little hover over here and it will give you the question prompt. If you forgot what the essay was, you hover it here and it shows the essay. So this is again, this is where we take technology to the next level and we start to produce something that I think is better than paper-based assessments in the classroom. In terms of reporting, of course, there's lots of data moving through the system. So students will be able to monitor their own macro and enabling skills. As long as you're defining what they are in the activities, they'll be reaching towards some sort of goal. And what will be really interesting, we'll be looking at longitudinal data of students over time. Teachers need access to particular student data, right? So they want to know how Max is going. So they click on Max, they can see Max's skills and Max's deficiencies and what Max has done and what he's not doing well. They need class level at a glance data. They need to be able to see who did the homework, who's struggling, etc. They need to, because of that, and again, teacher-driven system, they need to offer rewards. That reward might just simply be a little message to the student saying, well done. But that also might be some sort of punishment. When I say punishment, it's a pretty strong word. What I mean there might just be, well, maybe Max didn't do his homework, so therefore the teacher's going to book in a one-on-one 15-minute session with Max, whatever. That's some sort of punishment, I guess. You didn't do your homework. Admin also need reporting features for attendance, class level, etc. So this is starting. This is where it gets really interesting with that data. Cool. I've only got about 10 minutes left. Optimization pathways. What this means is different ways that you can push a student through a course to make it easier for them and more effective for them. And there's different options you have here. Curation is one of them. Content curation. So let's say, for example, you have a pronunciation course. Let's say your first language is Arabic. So you get into this pronunciation course, a little question pops up and says, what's your first language? You put in Arabic and it says, okay, you don't need all of these phonemes and these consonant clusters. What you need as an Arabic speaker, because of first language interference, is all of these. So that's content curation. Next one is prioritization. So this is an optimization pathway where I've taken PT Academic, and let's say haven't done very well in the reading section. So PT Academic being an integrated scoring test, it's going to pull items from the reading section, of course, but also from the speaking section, also from the writing section, and it's going to deliver them up to me so I know exactly what to focus on. I think there's a sort of, again, when you're looking at a student-centric platform, I think we give too much autonomy to students. I think a lot of students struggle to know where to start and how to continue. So these sorts of pathways help them with that. The other really cool one is scheduling, like workflows over time. So let's say I'm preparing for a test. I've got 6 weeks. It's going to put into my calendar a series of tasks, materials, and different interactions. So on Monday, I've got to attend this class, submit this assessment, do these modules, etc. This is all possible and stuff that we've actually built. Ultimately, I think what we're headed for, or hopefully what we're trying to do, is supplant the textbook with courseware, digital courseware. Courseware is teacher-driven live teaching. You're still central. You're still absolutely the most pivotal part of all of this. With personalized adaptive self-study for the student following that class, for example, that you've just taken. The student will then jump on the system and do some self-study. It'll be adapted to him. Then that student's going to submit an assessment. The teacher will be able to provide feedback. This is all in a single integrated system. There'll be different interactions with the teacher. Maybe it's a study plan consultation, a one-on-one tutorial, general meeting, doesn't matter. And of course, this is generating a lot of data for reporting for teachers, students, and administrators. And all of this is in the setting of some sort of workflow. What I think English language teaching needs right now is a purpose-built platform. I do not think that using disparate free tools is a good idea for your brand and your reputation. And I do not think that ill-fitting LMSs is the way to go. I do not think that Moodles and Canvases were ever built for language learning. That is not their purpose. And so I don't think they should be used. I think we should head towards digital courseware. That's both for teachers and students with rich teaching material and good student material that's interactive and blah, blah, blah. I think we need to move away from screen shared PDFs and documents. I think we need the system to sit on a network so we can share amongst ourselves. I don't think we should be using isolated systems, centralized systems. I think the system needs an inbuilt scheduling system, one that does things like live class bookings or different appointments. I think, again, Google Calendars, whatever you're using there, we need to move away from that. And I think we need a mix of live teaching with some of that interactive self-study, and definitely move away from the 4 hours of Zoom per day, because that is too much for a teacher, too much for a student. And I think we can do it much better. So just to sum up my meaning, what I think digital transformation is the digitization of everything that teachers, students, and administrators do at school. And I also think we can leverage technologies to make the experience for teachers, students, admin far superior than what it currently is. And I think we ought to head in that direction sooner rather than later. And I think that's the end of my talk.
All right. Thanks heaps for that, Jarrad. Yeah, lots of really interesting points you raised there. There were a couple of questions in the Q&A. Quite a few about, or most of them about assessment. One of the questions about assessment was, can you please tell us more about remote proctoring?
It's the one thing I said I don't know much about. Look, I think with medium stakes testing, I don't think the remote proctoring needs to be overly sophisticated. I don't think you need to be doing facial recognition stuff. I think you can just do tests, get everyone on Zoom at the same time. What we have is we can open assessments, for example. So it would have to be happening in real time. They would all have to be there together, even though they're in different locations. And I think just watching them on Zoom is a good idea. I think as a workaround at the moment, I think Google Docs is a great idea because you can actually see their keystrokes. But I mean, yeah, lockdown browsers is cool. And I think that stuff will sort of become a bit more mainstream, especially after this recent event with COVID.
Yeah. there was a question about, you mentioned disposable student materials. So May Barbary asked, do you use or recommend any student resources that teachers and students continually reference or return to at all?
I have no idea. I haven't been in a language classroom for 6 or 7 years, so I'm really out of the loop with current textbooks. Like what we've been doing with our material development is, again, as I mentioned, the rich teacher-driven material followed by quick and dirty practice for students. I think there's a sometimes there's a confusion of what's too conceptually, what the teacher should be driving at and teaching the complex concepts. That sort of goes into the student material sometimes. And I think it's really challenging. I think students just want instant gratification from their materials. Not sure if that answered the question very well, but.
Right. In terms of the interaction and digitizing that you mentioned, one of the questions was, did you mean AI when it comes to digitizing interaction?
No, I think the interactions need a teacher, just like we are now on Zoom. I still think that there's that human element. The presence of a teacher is a phenomenal driving force, and I don't think that's going to shift, honestly. Certainly not for a very long time, until we can't tell the difference between an AI and a teacher. But at the moment, it's teacher driven. Human relationships are massively important in this process.
Yeah. And then another question from Fergal Fleming was, how well do automated rubrics work for formative assessment?
Yep, fine. So that's what we do, actually. Somebody will be preparing for an IELTS test, and so they'll be going through a process. Let's say they're going to study for 4 weeks. They will submit assessments at various points along the timeline, and they'll learn from that. What we do is we don't just sort of tell them what they've done wrong. We give them links to remedial practice. This is the wonderful thing about those automated comments. Once you've really done up a rubric well, it'll have links to videos that you've created or other resources. So this person's scoring poorly in whatever prepositions, it'll link him across to a grammar series on how to improve prepositions. And all of this is not, that's hard to do with the teacher in the classroom. So that can be done elsewhere by the student.
Okay, great. That's sort of all of the questions in the Q&A. We do still have a few minutes, so I might throw in a question of my own, which is just your a couple just popped up now, but I'll continue with mine because I can. I just sort of want your general views on the landscape, the digital landscape in ELT, specifically in Australia at the moment, and where you sort of see it and where you see it going.
At the moment, I see a lot of great tools out there, and I think people are doing a pretty radical job of such a sudden shift to online teaching. Like, honestly, hats off to teachers who did this in 10 days. Pretty insane. And there are good tools out there, not necessarily Australian companies, but things like Quizlet, or, there's a number of cool tools out there. But, from an experience of a student, and again, with the brand of a school, it just doesn't work when you're pulling this, that, and the other from the internet. And, what we ultimately need to do is pull everything together into a single system for language learning. I think that's where we ought to go, for sure. Until then, it's going to be sort of sending students here, there, and everywhere.
Yeah. And on that sort of note, there was a question with regard to student tech competencies. So how do you manage different technology competencies of students across different countries? I mean, you've got students all over the world.
Yeah. Oh, look, that's a big one. One of my first teaching jobs in Melbourne was teaching newly arrived migrants and refugees. And yes, there are some people out there with very low digital literacy skills that are going to particularly struggle during this time. Yes, we have students from all around the world. They're pretty sophisticated users of technology. Some aren't. It all comes down to building user interfaces that are accessible, doing user testing yourself. It's possible. You can make websites simple enough for a lot of people to use.
Right, and I think we've got time for one more question, which is, well, another one's just popped up. So let's see if we can get to both of them. Could you give some examples of digital courseware?
I was talking about E2 language, actually.
Okay.
I really was. You know, there are publishers have books with access to websites. You know, unfortunately, some of them still have CD-ROMs in the back, but there are other ones where there's little scratchies where you can go across to different websites and whatnot. So that's in a way that, you know, we're all sort of heading in that direction towards digital courseware. As I mentioned, I think that's definitely the way to go for language learning.
Mm-hmm. And Natalie mentioned, she said, yeah, you said 4 hours is too long in a Zoom session.
Oh, sure.
How do lower level or beginner students go with self-paced learning online?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think lower level students need translations in the user interfaces, or else it's bamboozling. I remember studying Korean and looking at a Korean textbook that was all in Korean once, and I was just like, I can't even get past page 1 here. This is crazy. So yeah, there's things you can do. Certainly they can do self-study, but you need to guide them in the user interfaces there.
Mm-hmm. And maybe one more question, final question. How do you manage, and how important is it in this context to build rapport and a sense of community among students via this model?
Yeah, it's hugely important. I think it's one of the things that we do well is our teachers teach groups of these students, and the students come back and they like these teachers and the rapport's there. You know, one thing that we probably don't have on E2 language is peer-to-peer rapport, because we haven't really built peer-to-peer into it, but that's a possibility as well, and that would be awesome. And again, that would be a content issue, coordination and content issue.
All right, well, we'll leave it there for now. Thanks so much for that, Jarrad. That was, I mean, the chats, there's lots of love for you in the chat, lots of good ideas, they say.